All right, so we're live. Hey, I want to thank y'all for joining me, man. Marsha Garratt, Mr. Jon Dealey. I don't know if y'all, John, have you ever heard of Marsha? She does a lot of work, social work out there in the UK, activism.
I don't think
Um,
our paths cross, to be honest. Yeah.
well, that's okay. Well, today we'll get to know each other. So I want to thank everybody for joining me. As usual, my name is Greg. This is the S.K.N Black Star channel, and I'm glad that Marsha and John have given me some time out their schedule. I think this is a very important issue personally, and it's something that I've always wanted to discuss, but I've never quite known how to approach it really. I know Marsha told me she's had some bad experiences with people trying to almost ambush her, in these types of discussions. I don't want this to turn into that. And I'm glad that John is here because he has some unique experiences to share. And this discussion is about mixed race in Britain. How do people on different ends of the spectrum navigate this touchy subject in dealing with racial issues in the UK? I know even though some people like to act like the UK has no racial issues, it does. And I know people of mixed race heritage, have somewhat different experiences sometimes. So today I want John, who is a father of mixed race children, to speak on his experiences. I want Marsha, who deals with these situations herself of mixed race heritage, and she's going to, talk about how she navigates the situation, especially being a boots on the ground activist out there in the UK. Let me first start with John because John has some experiences that I want Marsha to sort of get into when it's her turn. John, what's up, man? How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah. How you doing?
Right, I'm all right, man. Hey,
I
John is
just
from
found out your proper first name.
yeah,
It's a good job you introduced yourself, because otherwise I was going to be calling you something else.
yeah. My name is Greg. That's my name. That's my name. That's the government.
Yeah. That's okay.
That's okay. So, John, you're a man who you have two children, a son and a daughter, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Right, with a Nigerian lady, and
Yeah.
for
So
for just
they're if we're
go
going to be
ahead. Sorry.
technical, her mum's British born, their mum's British born Nigerian. She's an Igbo by background.
Hmm. Right, and just for clarity's sake, John is in fact a white Brit, and this is
Yep.
why I wanted his opinions and his experiences to be shared with everybody, because he has seen and experienced certain things, and I want John to deal with it, man. John, tell me exactly in terms of dealing with, and you have young children. Have your young children experienced any racial situations already at their young ages?
Yeah. I mean, they're a bit older now, but the
Hmm.
first time they really experienced something directly, they were pretty young. So my son is going to be 12 in 10 days' time, and my daughter she's 9, she'll be 10 in March. The first time she really had something directly happen to her was at school when she was about 7, and a white kid in her class, at, for all intents and purposes, is a very middle class school, told her that all brown people should go back to where they come from when she was 7. And I didn't really feel that the school dealt with it either. The one member of staff was pretty upset about it, but overall, I never had an apology off the parents. Never heard anything back really, other than that it had happened. I never heard about the child being disciplined or educated around why you're saying this to another classmate. And this child's been to birthday parties that we've put on for my daughter, and I've talked to his mum, and I'm like, he's got this idea from somewhere. He's too young to really just be coming up with it by himself. I'm pretty certain somebody at home, whether it's his parents or his grandparents have got this idea into his head. She had another child tell her that her dad isn't white. It's not possible. I mean, I know it might not seem that major, but she was at junior school at what people would consider, well, actually, in terms of where it's rated. So in the UK, we've got Ofsted that rates schools, grades them according to performance. The school that she goes to in the south, certainly the south of Manchester, probably in Manchester as a city, not the entire Greater Manchester area, is rated as, if not the top, one of the top government schools, public schools.
Right.
And I know these things don't sound that bad, but I've got something that's more disturbing happen. It didn't happen directly to my son, to be fair, recently. But I sent you an article about that because it made the local press, didn't it? I don't know if you had a chance to look at that. So my son's recently started school and he's going to private school. And their school, the different age groups were playing rugby against another private school that has a very, very good reputation as a school, as an institution. I named the other school. The other school is Manchester Grammar School. Now, quite a famous person in the UK, but I don't know how famous he is outside of the UK, is a guy called Fabrice Mwamba. He was a professional footballer and he had a heart attack. He played for Bolton Wanderers. He had a heart attack at Tottenham Hotspur's ground. Obviously, had to retire from football. But he's a very well known person. So his son also goes to the same school as my son. And when his son scored a try in a rugby game, the pupils from Manchester Grammar School gave him monkey chants. These are what would be considered to be extremely well-to-do, well-off individuals behaving like football hooligans. I mean, I think this kid was a 12-year-old kid. So other 12-year-old kids are doing this sort of thing. That I know it's not serious in terms of they're not getting beaten up. They're not, having more serious things happen to them from that point of view. But all these people, if you were to talk to the parents of these people, they would be the people that would claim that there isn't any racism in the UK. These would be very middle-class people that you talk to. They'd also be the sort of people who likely would be in positions to give other people jobs because they're well-off individuals. So they'd often be in recruiting processes, which is worrying as well when you think about social mobility and things like that. That there's still this sort of deep underlying prejudice that is subtle, and I think that's one of the things about the UK. There's a lot of racism denial and sort of subtle things that are done so people can't be accused of being racist, rather than just upfront in your face racism, which happens as well. I mean, I'm not trying to say that's not, but the fact that this sort of underlying prejudice sits within the wealthy middle class is also pretty disturbing when you think about barriers to people who want to do well in life, who work hard and want to contribute to society and better themselves. There's still these sort of prejudices and obstacles there.
I see. Well, none of those things seem small to me, John, to be honest. None of those things seem small to me. Marsha, you've heard John. I know
I agree.
he says those seem small
Hello?
to him. But John, yeah, we hear you on mute. I'm gonna bring in Marsha just so she could answer some of those things. So Marsha, you've been dealing with this stuff. I read that you experienced something similar when you were a child, and you also work in schools to educate people. So John has said that his children have experienced this in school. What is your opinion on things like that?
Well, it's just not a surprise, is it? If racism exists in society, which we recognise that it absolutely does, then it has to exist in our education system. So it's not surprising. I think that the idea that those incidents are small, I appreciate why it might, because it's like, well, they're not being physically beaten up, but it's the impact that has on the psyche, how they see themselves. And if those children, that the young black man who scored the try and John's son, if they look at themselves and see themselves as less than because they are getting messages from students, from teachers, telling them that they're less than on account of their African heritage, it affects whether they can achieve their potential. So it's actually a really big deal. Absolutely, racism for all children of African heritage, particularly where it's visible, because with black mixed people it might not be visible. Where it's visible, you will experience racism at a young age. No question, really. You might not even know it's racism. It might be your teacher questioning your capability, but expecting you to be good at sport. That's racism. It might not feel like it, but it absolutely is. And it begins to, what it does is it informs your opinion of yourself. And so the way to navigate is through education, self-education.
John, are you there?
You want me to just keep talking?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I had to drop off. I just had some technical issues.
Did you hear Marsha at all?
I heard the last bit, but I think I understand what she was saying. From what I could gather, the reason I was sort of saying they might not seem like the biggest things in the world is because I know of much more serious things happening to people in later life.
Right.
I completely agree with what Marsha's saying. It's like, it's so undermining to the idea that you can go off and achieve things. Fortunately, certainly both of my kids believe that they can do good things academically. So my daughter has always wanted to be a doctor. It's just what she's wanted to do. And I'm confident that that's something that as long as she puts the work in, she'll be able to do.
Right.
And my son, if you ask my son what he's going to do, he'll just say he's going to do maths at Cambridge. He's not interested in telling you about sport or anything else. And he is good at sport, by the way. But that's not what he wants to do. He loves maths.
No.
So,
okay.
So it's good that they've been able to believe in themselves more than anything.
One of the things that I wanted to touch on also, I think Marsha touched on it in terms of when it's visible. I don't know if I caught it right. Are you saying when a child cannot pass as white, or when it's clearly visible that you have African heritage? Is that what you're saying, Marsha?
Yeah, can you hear me still?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. I don't like, and I know why you used it. I'm not, but I don't like the term past. I try, if I'm going to use it, I have to give context as to why I'm using it, because past has a positive connotation. But yeah, if you don't look white, I mean, you will still experience racism if you have a black parent, because you will experience it necessarily through them. And that's a different experience. But for someone like myself, who is clearly melanated, with Afro-textured hair, you will experience racism if you visibly look like you are not white, and you take on the traits of your African heritage. Without a doubt, you will experience racism in this country. And I think it makes no difference the level of class. So if you're talking about working class or middle class or upper class, it makes no difference what level of class. You just might get something more blatant, if you like, in what we would call the working class. But the racism that causes a great deal of harm in terms of social mobility for black people comes at a middle class and upper class level. The ones, people that have the platform to hire and to promote and where to invest. That's where you're going to see some of, the structural racism that works to keep a people down.
No, John touched on something that was, I don't want John to come in on this. John touched on something that I think is important, where the UK deals with racism in a way that it's a lot of denial, like a lot of these countries, um, where it's almost treated as something of a myth, a rumor, where they deny it's happening in society. But one of the most well publicized situations where the mask sort of fell off was when just recently the ending of the Euros, where you had the 3 black athletes who were abused verbally and whatever, very publicly so, in the UK. And again, you still see people know. And me and John are, we met because of boxing, right? And in the boxing community, there's this sort of denial of racial issues in the UK, where they say, oh no, in the UK we don't see our boxers as black or white. We just support our boys, right? No, this is nonsense, obviously, and we know it's nonsense. But can I ask you, Marsha, before John gets in, how does this work to retard the process or to keep back the process of actually dealing with the real situations? How does this work to keep that back, this sort of denial?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with John when he said that. I think the UK is the best in terms of distancing itself from the reality of racism. And it's partly been able to do that, because it's distanced itself from its racism in history. So because if we take the colonies that belong to Britain, enslaved African people were not en masse in plantations on on the British island, sorry, not British, on British island. But if we look at the colony of Jamaica, belonged to the British, enslaved people were taken there and brought massive amounts of money for this island. That isn't taught in our school. The extent of British colonialism, where it went across the African continent, in the Caribbean, and the fact that it had 13 colonies in America and took enslaved people to America. This was all led by Britain. America kind of had its birth through Britain, without a doubt. So, but this is not taught in our schools, so nobody knows it. People don't even really know where race comes from. So, like a quick point I'd like to make, and then I'll finish my point there, is I don't even use the term mixed race. I don't identify as mixed race because I didn't give myself that term. That was a term, that's a category that's been designed for me by a white supremacist system. So I reject it. It's not about being funny or trying to work with a one-drop rule. I just reject that term. I don't identify as it. If it has to come to it, then it's black mixed, and the black comes first. I don't identify as mixed race. So one of the ways that I work in school is by teaching this history, by teaching the history that we don't get, so people can begin to understand the present and how racism really works, because it has its roots there, and now we need to see up the tree, and that's what I do in school.
John, let me ask you something. In terms of your young children, how do you approach teaching them certain things? Because let me use an example here. I have a friend who is also a white male who has mixed race children here, and he doesn't see, he doesn't really understand when I tell him, there might be certain things you're not going to be able to put over to them, and you might have to really get them deeper involved in, with somebody else who understands certain parts of history, because you might not be able to put over certain things to them. How do you, John, deal with that situation? As Marsha said, in school, certain things are not taught.
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, I have a history degree. Mm-hmm. My degree is actually, it covered a large part of colonialism as well as a number of other things. So I'm actually quite well educated in the things that Martha's talking about. But I think you're referring to other things that I'm just never going to experience as well, as a white person.
Right.
Luckily, my children have quite a big extended black family that they're close with. They've got 3 black uncles that my son can talk to about other issues, as well as other members of the family that they can discuss things with. Now, I was always quite conscious of this being a potential issue before I had mixed race children, and I probably knew quite a long time ago that that was what's going to happen, because growing up, I had a friend who was mixed race, whose father was white, and he really resented his dad a lot. And so I always believed it was important for my children to have positive male and female black role models that they could talk to besides me to deal with issues. But from a historical point of view, I mean, some of the things Martha's talking about, it actually amazes me that Winston Churchill won a vote in this country to be voted the greatest Britain of all time, because that's only possible because most people don't know that Winston Churchill put thousands of black Kenyans, I think, well, hundreds of thousands of black Kenyans into concentration camps. And the purpose of doing this was to enable the white settlers to take over the best farmland as part of the colonization program of Kenya. He also did quite a lot of other terrible things when he was Minister of the Empire prior to the, you know, it's around the turn of the century that he's doing these bad things after the Boer War. And it's endless. I mean, the whole basis of the 1/8 rule in America comes from a British attitude towards slavery, more so than French or Spanish attitudes. If you look, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but one of the important leaders of the Haitian Revolution was mixed race and was free, and there was a grouping of people within Haiti that were free mixed race and free black people, because under the French, although it was a terrible regime, if a French slave owner had a child with a slave, they recognised that child, whereas within the British form of slavery, they didn't. They would enslave their own children. And when you think about that, that's what's led to the idea of what you're talking about from the point of view of passing. That's completely down to the British that could really come about if you think about it.
Marsha, let me ask you something. In your work, do you get pushback sometimes because people know you have white parentage?
When I think about it, over my career, what I would say is this: most definitely not from whiteness. I hope that makes sense. So most definitely not from whiteness is there any pushback about my anti-racism work. If I'm thinking about amongst my black people, over my career, no. And sometimes in a social situation as that happens, a few times, yeah, but at the same time, I have to recognize colorism and the reality of colorism in people's lives, and how for some people, when they look at me, my skin tone reminds them of a very bad experience or a time when they were compared to somebody and made to feel less than because that person was lighter. Do you know what I mean? So knowledge is power in terms of you don't internalize or take those things personally. But I mean, I would like to ask a question to Jon. Is two questions, please. One, if he could give a description of his children, obviously not to identify them, but do they look black mixed? Is my question. And the second,
very much so.
Yeah, and the second is, I think you said that your wife is of British Nigerian origin. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So within their Nigerian family, their black Nigerian family, do you feel that your children get given any kind of I'm going to use the term privilege, but any kind of, I would say privilege or props for being light-skinned? Have you witnessed that, or has your partner, your wife?
It's pretty hard to judge, and the reason that I'll say this is she's my ex-wife, let's be clear. She is much darker than her Then, well, one of her sisters are darker than the other two. So within her family, there's quite a broad range spectrum of colour, and she believes, and it's hard for me to gauge, that the rest of her family has been prejudicial against her because she's darker than them. They're all pretty. My in-laws, who I'm still on extremely good terms with and see regularly, seem, as far as I can tell, to if there's any favouritism, it's always towards their own children. As for the only person in their family who they see regularly from an older generation is their grandmother, and that's very hard to gauge if she has favourites or not. The only thing she's been open about, but this was a long time ago, and I don't know if it's still true. My son's the oldest of all of her grandchildren, and when other grandchildren started coming along, she told him, "It's okay, you'll always be my favourite." But I know that within the Nigerian culture, having favouritism amongst children is something that's quite open anyway. You'll often hear stand-up jokes about individual favouritism, and it isn't always based on being fair. As an example, her sister Rue is very fair. Fair enough for as a claim that she was mixed, more or less. She's not my mother-in-law's favourite daughter. A different one is. It's hard to judge. I've had a lot of non-family members talk about how much they like my kid's complexion because they live in Manchester. There's a massive Nigerian community in Manchester, and I've been to a lot of Nigerian parties, so people have commented this to me, meaning it to be a good thing. But I haven't seen any ill treatment of my other nephews and nieces who have got quite a broad spectrum of colour as well. Like I have a niece who's very dark. I have two nephews that are pretty fair, and another niece who you'd probably describe as sort of mid, in the middle. So I haven't seen anything directly around this personally, but I mean I can't claim it's not happening, but I've not witnessed it. I'm aware of colorism though, and it's definitely an issue because Nigerian community has a real problem with skin lightening, like a real problem with it. So there's a perception within the Nigerian community that fair is beautiful, for definite.
Okay, I mean, because I've definitely,
I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does in a sense, but obviously I'm not speaking to your children, so, and not that I should be, but so I couldn't gauge really whether they have heard, because a lot of those times those type of colorist comments from family can be really subtle, and it doesn't necessarily manifest in an actual behavior where one is actually ill-treated. It's just that one is given these type of compliments just for having light skin. And I know that exists. I work with many African families, and even within the same family, I've seen lighter skinned people, whether there's any white heritage or not, but receiving preferential treatment, which links back to your question, Greg, which was around pushback. In my activism work, I suppose I'm 40 years old. I have a reputation. Do you see what I'm saying? I've got to a place where people know me to be genuine. I'm doing this for the reasons that I am wanting to see the end of this system that oppresses people of African origin. I want this system to end, and whatever skills I've been blessed with, I will use to work against that system. So I'm known for that now. So generally, no, I haven't experienced that kind of pushback. I even went to Brixton and led a talk for a Black-led organization, fantastic organization. And I was leading a talk on colorism. I'm walking into a room as a light-skinned person with white heritage and delivering a presentation on colorism. That could have get to a room full of Black people. that could have got me a lot of backlash. But because I have the knowledge, because I've done the research, because I'm linking it to white supremacy and saying all of our focus should be on dismantling this system, no, there was no pushback. But socially, yeah, I have had looks or comments sometimes in Jamaica, not always in this country either, sometimes in Jamaica.
Jamaica is where your African side comes from?
Yeah, so my father is Jamaican, but obviously Jamaicans, I link it always back to Africa.
Yeah, well, I don't bother with the, of course, Jamaica, but that's why I said your African side, your black
yeah,
side, right?
Correct.
Yeah. I don't bother with all that, whatever. I myself am from St. Kitts. That's where I live. And of course, the same issues we have here in terms of colorism and whatnot. We still struggle with that. You know what I mean? And it's something that you said it correctly, needs to be dismantled. And but then it's all about education. I'm sorry, I'm hoping John gets back on. He seems to be in transit going somewhere, because I want him on to speak about some of the situations that he's spoken to me about, because there's more stuff. So in terms of, because sometimes I'm amazed listening to certain people in the British Parliament who have black faces, but are used as basically the mouthpieces of racists in Britain. There's a lady, I think her name is something Badenoch or something like that. Kemi
Badenoch.
Right. And there's a couple other people, but they just I sometimes struggle to understand. These people don't realize how they're being used. What I find is that white supremacy always finds tools to use. So they would get a certain useful Negro, blackface, preferably dark-skinned, because that for them represents. See, a real black person is speaking here, and that person then is used as the megaphone for them, and they speak through that person's mind, through their mouth, and that person is parroting white supremacist talking points. Yes. You see it with certain people in America, the Candace Owens and them people, the same things. Explain to me how these people are viewed by you. How much have you been in contact with these types of people, and how do you deal with that?
When you learn over time, because those type of people used to get me really angry, and the anger doesn't really do much for the work of dismantling the system. So it's about transmuting those feelings. So I actually don't focus on those people. I do hear them, but I don't focus on them. When the Sewell, there was a report done in Britain, and this came out this year, and it was a report into racism in Britain, and it basically said that institutional racism doesn't really exist, and that racism is mainly a problem online. And then they retracted, and it was written by mainly black people. And when it came out, everyone came for them. It was poorly written. There were so many things wrong with it, but everyone came for them to say this is totally inaccurate. So sometimes we can write pieces and raise our voices there, but really my work is on focusing on the youth and the community that I can reach, rather than trying to change these minds of careerists, who they all do this for the individual gain. It's done for individual gain. And if we look in history, if we're taught a correct history, or if we self-educate ourselves, white supremacy has always found those people. During racialized slavery, it could be in the form of an overseer, or the head enslaved male in the house. It could be in the form of that. To the modern day now, where people can get in and become politicians and stuff, and do the work for them. What really bothers me is when it is a black mixed person who's doing that. I think there can be a response of it's because they're confused. I've heard that a few times, where a black mixed person, I don't want to give any names because I'm not going to give them any recognition. I want people to go off and search them up. But there's a few black mixed people in Britain who've given large platforms to deny the existence of racism. And then the responses to that, from the black community, more time, is that they're treacherous. Now, I do get why that's being said, but there's this implication that it's about confusion. I don't think it's about confusion. It's about individual gain.
Right.
Definitely.
One example you were saying about like the types of people. There was, as I said, it's always some plantation overseer or something like that. But one example from a gentleman in Cuba, he did a biography of his days as a runaway, and he spoke about how they would get like a certain slave who could move back and forth between the plantation house and the barracoons, and able to transmit information, especially when they were trying to get them to convert. So the slaves would mistrust the Catholic priests or the plantation owner, but they would educate a slave just enough so they're able to go into the barracoons and speak to them there and try and get them to come over and consider doing what the plantation owner or the priest want. So they've always found these people to use as their mouthpiece, to use as their gatekeeper, right? To speak to the unruly ones. So, question for you: when you deal with young people who are of Black mixed heritage, right?
Yeah.
Black mixed heritage. Do you come across? Or you probably already said. Do you come across ones who are almost confused to the point where they're resentful of their African heritage, or how do you approach someone like that?
Okay, so I think I do it with love first, and that shouldn't be underestimated when I say I do it with love, because I have an awareness of what those young people are going through, and I don't mean in terms of our lives are exactly the same, because they could have completely different parentage mix and all the rest of it. But I understand that they're growing up in a white supremacist society in Britain. They are surrounded by images and messages that consistently tell them what Blackness is, which is inferior. That's the message that's portrayed. It's not true, but that's the message that's portrayed, and that ties back into the original concept of race. So they're consistently, and if they're being raised by white parents and they have no access to their Black parents or anything to do with their African heritage, I can understand why they've internalized those views to dislike their African heritage. I've known of a few, I'm going to use young ladies as an example because of the hair thing, and women having pressure on them of how to look. But these women, young women really hating their hair, and they associate their Afro-textured hair with their African heritage. So that's another negative. Like I myself, I have really quite Afro-textured hair. It's a blessing from the motherland, grows to the sun, But even I've had people say, "Oh, you didn't get that good mixed hair," like that kind of. You actually came out with Afro hair. So I've seen that in those young women, and what I've seen sometimes in young men who don't have access to Black role models, which is why I liked John's answer from before, is that when they're starting to get racially profiled by teachers and police and viewed as dangerous and treated as dangerous, and yet that's not them. And they don't have a Black role model or a Black parent to help them through that. That's where I can hopefully plug a gap, so they can take part in. I run a Pan-African Saturday school. I also do WhatsApp group sessions online. They join in the groups and they understand what racism is, how it works, how that includes Black mixed people, how we are manipulated to dislike our African heritage and to see ourselves as above than due to our European heritage. And then with that knowledge, you can resist that programming. You can resist it. I mean, I'm proof of that. I was actually adopted. So I was raised by two white parents in a very white area in England. And yet I have a complete Pan-African ideology. How did I get to that? I got to that through self-education. And I educated on the history of race and racism, including Black mixed people's positioning within that and how white supremacy positioned it, so that I could resist that messaging and work against it. And that's what I do. And I do the same with Black mixed people. So I was having a conversation with a young lady recently, and she identified as white. She said, "I see myself as white." And to look at her, she is clearly not white. So I asked her, I said, "Do you think that you look white?" It was just a questioning, but I'm not going to yell at her and call her a sellout or say, you know, these things, because then that will just make her turn completely away from wanting to know more about her Black heritage. So she said no. And so I said, so why then do you identify as white? So we were having a discussion. She said, because she wanted to be more like her mom, because she's not keen on her father. So then we had another discussion about that. And I said, but you to identify as Black or Black mixed is not a problem. It doesn't, you know. So we had a discussion about it, so she could begin to develop her own thinking. I cannot tell her how to identify or how to think. I can just give her as much knowledge as I can, so that she doesn't. I think it's damaging for a young woman who is clearly Black or Black mixed to believe that they're white in a white society. It will do her no favors. She will experience so much rejection if she goes forward with that mindset. So all I can do is inform, and do it gradually, and do it consistently, and do it with love.
Jon, you there, brother? Is Jon there? Jon Dealey, you there, sir? Man, Jon having a lot of audio issues, man. Jon, whenever you get a good connection, you know. Jon.
How is it now?
Yeah, I hearing you know.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that.
I need you in this discussion, sir.
Yeah, because I think I picked up on what I was hearing, but I'm not sure. So can you catch me up a little bit?
No, well, we started off by talking about the fact that the UK government and other governments also use Black mouthpieces, gatekeepers, people who have Black faces who they can speak through to get their positioning and their propaganda out. And it comes from, and when other Black people see it or hear it, it's coming from a Black mouth. So, and they can't recognize that it's coming from a position of white supremacy or from racism, whatever you want to call it. So let me ask you something, Jon. When you see a situation like that, where you have people in the UK, I call the person's name, I think it's, Marsha said her name. Is it Kylie Badenoch?
Kemi Badenoch.
Kemi Badenoch. And I remember listening to this person, and I was like, this person is a perfect overseer. Are you worried, Jon, when you see gatekeepers like this, who might have heritage similar to your children, who might have skin tone similar to your children, when they allow themselves to be used as megaphones for white supremacist people, are you worried that your children might look to these people and sort of take their words as, you know, as gospel? Are you worried?
Well, first of all, I've got to be honest, I don't know who she is, because I try and avoid a lot of the media because it's just a lot of propaganda. The only person in the government who potentially could fit the description that you're referring to, but I don't think he is a mouthpiece for government propaganda, who I follow, who I know what message he puts out. And I don't know if Marsha knows him. Sir Simon Woolley? Do you know who I'm talking about, Marsha, or not?
No, I don't know who that is.
Okay, no, okay. Well, Jon, it doesn't have to be a government person, but people.
Well, this is a government person. So he's a Black person who's in the House of Lords, and his role is to promote diversity. That's his role. And I don't know if you remember, I talked to you about LinkedIn.
Yes.
And all the people trying to intellectualize their racism about the team taking the knee.
Well, please. I mean, you know, Marsha doesn't know, so I don't mind. Bring it up.
Yeah, so it was Sir Simon Woolley's post. So Sir Simon Woolley was posting on LinkedIn about how positive it was that the England team were taking the knee, because the whole team were doing it. They're taking a joint decision as a team of diverse makeup, to take a stand against racism. And when he was putting these positive posts in there, there was a lot of white middle-aged males, to be frank. I didn't see too many females doing this. trying to intellectualize why it was not acceptable for the England team to do this, as if they'd been made to do it. Comparing it, one of the most ridiculous ones was comparing it to a Nazi salute. And I got into it with one of them on there. I was a bit surprised people were prepared to talk about this.
John, you're breaking up. You're breaking up. Go ahead.
Because it'll get better in about a minute, so I don't know. Is it all right now?
It's all right now. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So I put in a statistic about, because I mean, people were trying to deny there was a problem with racism in the UK. Now, for me, one of the most damning statistics is the difference between the black population as a whole, which I think is about 3% in the UK, and the prison population, which I think is about 38% black. So it's ludicrous, the difference. And it's like they have criminalised being black in the UK to a large extent, like they have in America. Like the biggest aspect that we have in common with America, and one of the things that gets denied the most, is how much more likely a young black man in the UK is to go to prison than a young white man. And I put that statistic out there as a government statistic. It's not my statistic, so I just put a link to it and explain what it was to show that there was a genuine problem with institutional racism in the UK. And this, I haven't got a good word for him, person said that that's a problem with some ethnic groups if they commit more crimes. Now, I was so annoyed I wasn't actually able to respond to that, because I have to use LinkedIn as a professional place as part of my work because of what I do for a living. Fortunately, somebody else came into the discussion who I'm pleased about, was also a white person, which is fortunate. in my opinion, it's fortunate anyway. And they put in the government statistics that showed that more white people commit crimes than black people. So just to highlight how racist that attitude is, to think that, oh, the only reason these black people are more likely to go to prison is because they commit more crimes. No, they're just more likely to be wrongly accused and persecuted by the legal system in the UK because of the colour of their skin.
Hold on. Janelle Daniel, she asks, is this discussion mostly about addressing the issues that people of mixed race face when confronted with some of the same problems that non-biracial children of melanated heritage tackle? It's basically all of that, you know. I mean, we almost have to wrap up because Marsha only have a few minutes left with us, but it's basically all of that. And I want to do this discussion again because it's a much broader issue that I want to speak about, especially how mixed race, like people who are mixed, are perceived by other people. Because I know being in certain circles, and I get into conversations, some people inherently mistrust mixed people. They have a mistrust for them. I think Marsha addressed that when she said she went into a certain lecture hall, and because she was armed with the information and because of the work that she's put in, people know that she's a genuine individual. So it's really about all of that.
The only place that I've actually heard that type of mistrust has come from people who are British born, of Caribbean background, but they were just saying, and it's just random silly prejudice, that mixed race people were more likely to suffer with mental health problems and anger management issues, which struck me as just strange prejudice, really.
That actually ties into numerous reports that have been done by institutions, like government institutions in both here and the US. So it's actually based on a white supremacist myth. So the idea that Black mixed people have a problem or are lost in terms of not knowing who they are, it has a long history. It actually does have basis. And the only way to navigate that, well, for me anyway, has been to understand where that comes from. So because Black mixed people ultimately pose a threat to the concept of race, the idea that white is naturally superior, and black is naturally inferior. That's what race actually is. Because black mixed people pose a threat to that just by existence alone, we have been stereotyped as a problem, as lost, and as treacherous. And then there's been aspects throughout history that kind of back that up. Now, that's one side of the story. The stories of black mixed people who have stood unified with the black collective against white supremacy, those stories tend to get lost, or the individual is identified as black. And they might have identified themselves as black, yes? But when it comes to some of the things that happened in Haiti, the free people of color that you referred to earlier on, they went to France and they asked for rights only for the free people of color and free black people. So freedom was the precursor, wealth was another, but there was this emphasis on because we have some white heritage. Now, it's contradictory and it's confusing, and black mixed people haven't created this. The white supremacist system has created this. It's contradiction and confusing because at the same time in Haiti, many black mixed people were enslaved. So you have free people of color going to France to ask for rights for themselves, knowing that they had their kin enslaved, and they weren't going to fight for their rights. In the same way that the free black people of color, but this is all about division. I've read in C.L.R. James's book, the Black Jacobins. I read that Haiti had something like nearly 100 different racial categories for proximity to whiteness. Jamaica had octoroon, sambo, mulatto, quadroon, all of these different categories, which was all there for the purposes of division. And then with that, you have miseducation. So many of the black mixed children of white Haitians, who obviously were male, were sent to France for education. What were they learning there in the heart of a colonizing nation? They were learning that their African heritage was inferior and to be grateful for their white heritage. So when they go back to Haiti, they reproduce the white supremacist system and not challenge it. So there is some historic basis actually to that treachery, but the other stories, well, that's what I'm putting into a book right now. That's why I know so much on it. So the other stories of those black mixed people that stood in unity with the black collective in recognition that in the white supremacist system, we will always be less than, and we are not above black. Those stories are hidden, and I'm bringing them to the fore in this book.
Okay. I can't wait for that. But once you bring that out, I want to copy
that.
There's
a couple of things I'd like to point out there, because this is still an overriding issue that's kind of, for me, a bit of a hangover from colonialism and the slave trade, in that overall European history is it's put forward too much as being ultimately, for the majority of human history, Europe was a barbarous backwater for pretty much all of it. I'd say it's only sort of 300 years where you could say that Europe wasn't one of the most backward parts of the world. And this is still really misunderstood. And then, unfortunately, you've got a complete misrepresentation of African history and how civilized and advanced it was. Throughout its history, there isn't really a gap in that. Just crazy things like the idea that Africa was illiterate is still something that's widely thought to be the case, when there's loads of forms of writing that are African in origin. There's a lot of types of writing. And then coupled to that, a large part of Western Africa was obviously literate for longer than most of Europe was, using the Arabic scripts. But there's also indigenous forms of writing as well. And these things just aren't taught.
Right.
They're not explained to people. So it's another, all of these sorts of ideas were used to justify colonialism, to justify the slave trade, and they haven't been repealed in the teaching of history. Most people in this country think that Europe was the leading civilization. They probably think it was the case forever. And that's just not the situation on any level at all. For most of its history, Europe was a very backwards place to an extreme level.
Well, I'm working on currently a presentation for this channel on Nathaniel Wells.
Yes, yes.
a slave owner. He's from St. Kitts, by the way. He's from a Welsh slave owner and an enslaved African woman from here in St. Kitts. So I'm working on a presentation here on him. So I'll be doing that in the next week or so. But I would love to have, you guys back on, Marsha, to come back on, and let's talk about the good, the bad, about the misconception about mixed race people in history and whatnot, because I know about the bad, you know about some of the good, but if you have some information you want to share, I'd love to have you back so we can have a broader discussion. I know I said an hour. I don't want to keep you. I don't like to keep people back. So, if you want to wrap up, it's fine by me.
I would have liked to have asked. I do need to go, and I apologize because it's Sunday here, Sunday night, and it starts to get crazy. I'm on the I'm talking. I'm just letting people know. So it gets crazy here in my house. But I would like to ask John a question, and I hope this doesn't come across as offensive or rude. It's just a thought that I had. So when you disappear, when your signal had gone bad, John, I was explaining to Greg that I was adopted by 2 white parents and raised in a very white area, myself and my brother. And my parents, they good people, did all the rest of it. But it really was significant. And I know this is not exactly the case for your children's situation. That's because we don't all have the same situation. If you're mixed, you don't all have the same parentage and heritage and so on. But when my brother started to get racially profiled by police, he was a good kid. He studied. He was an outstanding athlete. He ended up becoming a professional football player in this country. When the racial profiling started with police, they'd start bringing him home. They would say to my white father every time, he's done nothing wrong, but we had some calls. We thought it'd be best if we just brought him home. And then my dad did not understand that this was racial profiling happening in reality. He didn't also understand the impact that had on my brother, because he'd gone from a kind of a happy-go-lucky kid to now being viewed as a criminal. And that impacts your self-perception, which is something I was talking about earlier. I wanted to ask, since you said, and I went to private school as well, I think you said your children go to private school, do you think that money or class will be a way out of, them experiencing things like racial profiling, particularly for your son?
No, it's the short answer. So, my ex-wife, I'm very close to 2 of her cousins who grew up in London, grew up in South London, and the older one of them, he's obviously male. He's in his 30s now. He went to private school, but he also grew up as a black man in South London, and he was subjected to all of that. He's a very, very intelligent guy. He was also a very good athlete, but he got subjected to that process, and he was at private school doing well. So I don't expect it to not happen. I can hope that it won't, but I think it probably will. So that's the short answer. I think it probably will happen. But
okay, so I was just curious.
Not only am I aware, so I'll give you an example of how I understand this sort of thing. Right, as a young man, I dressed and looked like quite a dodgy stereotype of a dodgy white person, and I had a lot of friends in what would be classed as a middle class area. So I can remember one night I walked home from my friend's house to my mum's house, which isn't very far, and I got stopped 4 times by 4 different groups of police officers who told me that they thought, that it was obviously very suspicious what I was doing. But here's the big difference. For that to stop happening, all I had to do was change the way I dress, and it stopped happening immediately. Whereas I know, irrespective of if you're walking around in a suit, being as respectable as you want, if you're visually black, which my son most definitely is, he'll get profiled. But I'm not naive to it. I know that I've had, because I grew up and lived in Birmingham, and spent a lot of time with a wide, diverse group of people, so I'm aware of what happened. So I'm really not naive to it. And fortunately, I know people who have experienced it, who understand it, and there's measures that I'll put in place to help my son deal with it, basically. But I think it will probably happen.
Marsha, you there?
Thank you. That wasn't like a personal question. It was just something that came into my mind when we were talking, because it was only many years later that my dad began to really understand the reality of racial profiling. But then, you know, like I said, we were adopted, and you know, so he's not like he had proper connection to black people, but he's never thought outside of being a white man, which is what many white people do. It's very hard for them to think outside of that, including the white parent of a black mixed child. So that's why I asked the question. That's why.
That's okay. That was the point of the discussion we're having today.
And it's true, Marsha. And it's something that that's why I said quite early on in this discussion that I always thought it was important for my kids to have positive black role models within the family. And people that they could talk to about things that I'm never going to experience. I might know they happen, but it's not going to happen to me.
I have a question to both of you before we finish, and I guess, you know, after that you guys are free to do what advice would you give to someone who is engaged in a interracial relationship? You know, they're gonna have kids, or someone who is about to adopt a young black child, maybe. What advice would you give them to deal with what is coming, what is going to come? What advice would you give them? Any one of you?
Well, I can go first. I think the important thing is really what I was talking about. It's important to have a broad support group, so they've got positive role models that they can talk to about issues that aren't just them. That would be a concern that I'd have about how you would deal with this if you were adopting black or mixed race children, because you might not have that built-in support network that my kids have. So when they're not at school, they spend the majority of their time with black people, and they have people they can talk to about issues. Which it sounds like, for all the best will in the world, Marsha didn't really have that support; just wasn't available. So I don't know what advice she'd give.
My advice would be, so no, we didn't have access to black networks and black community. So how I've navigated is, and I keep saying it's through education. And I think if you are a white person who's wanting to interracially adopt, or if you're a white person who's going to have a black mixed child, and you know, we're talking specifically black mixed, not other types of mixes, which makes sense because of the reality of anti-black racism, is be prepared to have, and you should be having the most difficult conversations about race that maybe you've ever had in your life. Do not make the mistake of thinking because you went to a particular school and had a really great experience, your black mixed child will have the same. Don't make the mistake of thinking they'll be treated the same as you in this society. And that for me is a very difficult recognition. There's a lady that I know who, you know, a white lady, she consistently says her daughter's never had any racism. Her daughter's 14. I know her daughter has. I know that without knowing the daughter personally. I know she has. I know what she looks like. I know which school she's going to. I know she's had racism. Maybe she's just made the choice not to tell her mother because she might think, what can she do about it? Or she doesn't understand. So all of this wider awareness about race is what's needed. And I don't actually genuinely see that. I see people having relationships based on attraction, and children are being born, and then there's quite a lot of, whether there's access to black communities or not. But I would agree with John on that, is as well, be prepared to, or you should already have, real genuine connection with black communities.
Right. Well, hey, I want to thank both of y'all for coming down, man. Hey, you know, I'm hoping to do it again. I would love to have y'all back. This is a very, very good discussion. I know Marsha have to go. This is a busy lady. John is on the go somewhere in Birmingham somewhere. And I don't want to keep y'all no more, but I thought it was a nice discussion, an hour. That's all right. We could do it again. I'm going to be doing a presentation on Nathaniel Wells, a mixed race man, black mixed race man, who owned slaves, who owned his own family after he was bequeathed his father's empire here in St. Kitts. So any last words from you, Marsha?
He ended up in England, have you seen that? Became the High Sheriff of
Oh yeah, he was very well to do in England, very well to do.
I would love to see your presentation, would be one of my last comments. And thank you very much. I'd be very happy to come back on and talk more about this topic. Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Marsha. Thank you very much. John the Great, my Birmingham correspondent. Anything from you, sir?
Yeah, I'm just sorry about the bad connection, because I'd like to do it again where we could get a bit more into this as well, because there's a lot to talk about. I think I went into this situation of knowing that my children would be subjected to the same racism that the system subjects black people to in this country. I knew that would always happen, so I wanted a support structure in place to deal with it, because I wasn't naive, basically.
Right.
But then, like, if overall the statistics for Birmingham is it's the most diverse city in the UK, but particularly once you get within a certain distance from the city centre, which is where I grew up and I spent all my life up until I was 30 years old, it's tremendously ethnically diverse. So here it's pretty normal. But the last thing that I would say on this whole situation is, if we're ever going to get rid of this artificial concept of race, because ultimately in biology it doesn't exist. It's something that's made up by society. It's not real. It has no biological basis whatsoever. Get to eradicate racism, one of the strongest ways to do it is to have more mixed race children. It's one of the best ways to break down barriers in the long term, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but I think that's something that, if we could understand that actually the only race that exists is the human race, and that's the only one, then we could get past this. But it's going to take a long time, and that combined with sensible education about accurate history of black people, as opposed to what gets taught at the moment, I think those two things would go a long way to sort of overturn the racism that exists as a consequence of colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade at the moment, really.
Yeah, can I just say, Greg, if we do come back and do another discussion on this, that would be something I would really like to discuss. Because straight up, I totally disagree with more mixed people means less racism.
I don't think you can breed out racism. It's not something you can breed out.
It's not really about breeding it. It's not about breeding it out. I definitely don't want to breed it away.
Because there are lots of look at the Proud Boys. Like at least two of their members that I know of have black kids.
Yeah, it's weird because one of the leaders of the Proud Boys actually wears elekes, right? So he's obviously into some. Proud Boys are. They're essentially an EDL of America, and they were leading this storming of the Capitol in Washington the other day. But one of the leaders is this guy. I think he's a Cuban, but he's obviously a black Cuban, or he has African heritage, and he also wears eleke beads, right? Which tells me he is in some form of African spirituality. Yet he's leading this white supremacist group. So it's just really strange, right? So. But whatever. Look,
and some of their vocal racist white members do have black mixed kids. They do.
Yes, yes. Also, yes. A lot of these white supremacist people have black mixed children. They have black wives. It's really crazy. It doesn't change that. Anyway, it's been an hour. I want to do it again. If y'all want to come on when I'm doing the Nathaniel Wells presentation, I could do it live for y'all, or we could discuss it. I'm all for it. You know, so y'all have a great day. Marsha, thank you again. I know you're a busy woman. John,
Thank you, John. Thank you for the discussion.
I know John is on his way to Tesco somewhere.
No, I'm going to the gym. I'm in bloody underground car park.
Okay, John. I know you're in shape, John. Don't remind me. Thank you.
We don't need to talk about that now. We don't need to talk about that now. But I definitely wasn't trying to present mixed races as the answer to racism, but at the same time, I don't think that we should be putting barriers in the way of new mixed race children being born.
But you're not gonna stop nobody from doing what they want to do. You know what I mean? So anyway, guys.
No, I know that. I know that. Okay. All right, thanks. Thanks, Greg. We'll do this again.
No problem. Yeah, man, we'll do it again, man. Hey, peace out to y'all, man. Have a great day. Peace.